This video is brought to you by Squarespace.com. Mental barriers. Yo, those are real. You know that old saying by Confucius, those who think they're right and those who think they're wrong are pretty much always correct. Facts. Today we're talking about two things. What happened to Eddie Lacy and how to not let it happen to you. And obviously with Eddie Lacy, his weight was an issue, but I think the real problem were the mental barriers that he built up for himself. The simplest way to put it is, what is the story that you telling yourself about yourself? Eddie Lacy had so much negativity projected onto him. He took that and stacked it on top of another issue, and now it seems like he's out of the league. Because if you keep telling yourself the same BS story, eventually it's gonna come true. Cue the Wayne. Eddie Lacy grew up in Gretna, Louisiana, which is a small suburb of New Orleans, Louisiana. He was a pretty normal kid, riding his bike all the time, rushing off the school bus to go catch that last 20 minutes of Dragon Ball Z, and he was skinny. Like many of us from my generation, Eddie used to idolize Allen Iverson. He even copied his look as a kid. You know, the cornrows, the arm sleeve, the whole swag. And as a kid, Eddie was popular with his peers. He was hella outgoing, fun-loving, made people laugh. I mean, dude was never at home. He couldn't even sit through a full football game on TV. He had to get up and go outside and do it himself. I ain't gonna lie, I was the exact same way. But when Eddie was a freshman in high school, Hurricane Katrina would change Eddie's life dramatically. His family had a bit of money, so they were able to leave New Orleans before the storm hit, but they had to watch the whole thing in horror from a family member's home in Beaumont, Texas. By the time Eddie and his family went back to the only home he'd ever known, it was completely destroyed. And Eddie's childlike exuberance, unfortunately, went with it. The once happy-go-lucky kid who loved cracking jokes would never be the same. After the storm, Eddie and his family moved in with his aunt in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It was a decent-sized house with 3 bedrooms. The issue was there was only 1 bathroom, and with Eddie and his family moving in, that made 10 people living in that house. 1 bathroom, 10 people. Not a good combination. Needless to say, that didn't last too long, and eventually Eddie's family moved into a small trailer in Geismar, Louisiana. It wasn't the brick house that he'd grown up in, but maybe it was just a tiny bit closer to normal. Now obviously Eddie had experienced something extremely traumatic, but like many of us, instead of coping with this directly, Eddie shut down and repressed his feeling. Now the trauma festers. So growing up, Eddie Lacy lacked stability, security, and familiarity. And when you constantly living in a different place every few months, that'll take a toll on the kid. But there was one place where Eddie did find comfort and familiarity: family dinners. See, Eddie's mom would make it home every night from nursing school and whip up a nice home-cooked meal. The family gathers around the table and they'd eat. What did they eat? Some good old Southern soul food. Now, if you're not from the South, you might not know nothing about this. Just understand something. It's amazing, it's addictive, but it's not the most healthy thing in the world. Now, he didn't realize it, but it was right then and there that Eddie Lacy changed his relationship with food forever. It had now become a source of happiness for him. Not only did it taste good, but while he was eating it, he was with the people he loved, and anytime he felt like he wanted to access those feelings or those memories, he would eat. This is actually common in a lot of people who are obese, and it seems like a small thing, but it's bigger than you think. During that unbelievably tough time in Eddie's life, he kept his mental strong by feeding himself positivity. And it seems like Eddie stopped this practice later in life, but during the time he was staying in the trailer, he had his goals posted on the wall, and he had his mom put stars up on his ceiling, same as he'd had in his room back in New Orleans before the storm. A huge source of his motivation was getting his family out of that trailer. And it was at that point that football was no longer fun for Eddie. It was now about business, and that was when Eddie Lacy started to run angry. Although Eddie had began to adjust, he was still repressing a ton of anger. This didn't necessarily help him with making friends, but on the football field, oh, it came in handy. As a sophomore, he put up 1,200 yards and 13 touchdowns, only to get even more pissed, I guess, the next year, as he scored 34 touchdowns, bro. 34 touchdowns as a junior in high school. Despite an injury-riddled senior season, Eddie Lacy earned a scholarship to Alabama, and this got him an opportunity to get out of that trailer and onto a better situation. But when he got to Bama, he realized something. He'd never actually lifted weights before, or really even worked out hard. It was all natural talent that got him here, but now everybody was talented, and that alone wasn't gonna cut it. The Bama practices proved so difficult for Eddie, he contemplated quitting several times as a freshman. The workouts were so intense and so tough on him that in hindsight, he still says that was the worst year of his life. Given all that he's been through, that is a profound statement. But like a lot of youngsters, having someone yelling at him and holding him accountable ended up being exactly what Eddie needed. He struggled at first, but he'd adjusted by his redshirt freshman season. And despite sharing the backfield with 2 future first-round picks, Eddie Lacy burst onto the scene in Bama's 2010 opener with 113 yards and 2 TDs. He ended up having a great freshman season. He finished the year with 406 yards and 6 TDs, and he did that as a third-string running back at a powerhouse school. He also had his best yards per carry average that year, averaging 7.3 yards every time he touched it. Now, be that as it may, Eddie still had to play his role and be patient. In 2011, Mark Ingram moved on to the NFL, but Eddie was now the backup to Trent Richardson. And in case y'all forgot what a monster this dude was, Trent Richardson went over 100 yards in 9 different games that year. He won the running back award and he finished 3rd in the Heisman. So Eddie had to wait his turn. All he could do was play his role. 95 carries, which was nearly double what he got the year before. 674 yards, 7 TDs as Bama rolled for another national title. At this point, Eddie was seasoned, and when he finally got his chance to be front and center in 2012, dude didn't disappoint. He carried the ball 204 times and still managed to average 6.5 yards per carry. He also scored more touchdowns than his first 2 years combined, with 17. He helped lead Alabama to yet another national championship win, a game where Eddie was named MVP. It was the highest of highs, and the next high would come when Eddie announced that he would forego his senior season and enter the NFL draft. Now, Eddie weighed in at 231 pounds, running a 4.64 at his pro day, but a few red flags went up surrounding Eddie that hurt his draft stock a little bit. 1, he had an operation on his toe that scared some teams away, even though the doctor said it was fine. But that was the smaller one. 2, the bigger concern was Eddie's love and passion for the game of football. A lot of scouts question this due to the fact that Eddie wasn't one of those guys who wanted to talk about football 24/7. He had other interests. He was known to be a little bit of a loner, a little depressed, a little unmotivated, if you will. And while I can completely relate with Eddie in this situation, I do understand that when an organization is trying to invest millions of dollars in you to do one thing, they really want you to be focused on that one thing. I get it. Now again, while I love the game of football, I'm not the type of person to sit there and watch football the entire day. But it threw me for an absolute loop to find out that Eddie Lacy, NFL running back, doesn't watch football at all. He says it's one of those things that just doesn't interest him, which kind of takes us back to his childhood when he first lost his passion, if you will, for the game. Now it seemed that football was a means to get by, and Eddie wasn't exactly hiding this, so it was pretty easy for scouts to pick up on. So Eddie Lacy fell in the draft, all the way down to the 2nd round. Not that long of a fall. Eddie was drafted by the Green Bay Packers. And even though Eddie had a lot of early success in the NFL, it was unfortunately just never gonna last. Eddie Lacy had never become self-motivated enough to navigate all his freedoms in the NFL. When he was at Bama, somebody was always standing over him, making him do the right thing, even helping him control his craving of what he called China food, the Asian cuisine that Eddie often posted online about. That's how infatuated he was with it. Once he got to the league, it was up to him to build these habits. And you could tell he just really didn't have the type of personality to get that done. Why do I say that? Well, after his very first Packers workout, and the first thing he says was, "Oh, this all I gotta do?" Boom, out of there. When he was at Bama, he was pushing his body. His body was changing, it was responding. It was allowing a man of his size to maintain his size and to do what he did out on the field. But once he got into the league and people were no longer standing over him, he did the bare minimum, which some guys can get by with, but Eddie's not one of those guys. Nonetheless, this dude was unbelievably talented, bro. He could run that rock, and his first season in the league was an amazing success. He ran for 1,178 yards and 11 TDs. He broke the Packers' rookie rushing record, made the Pro Bowl, and won Offensive Rookie of the Year. Eddie was able to slide by on talent for a couple of years, as his second season was just as productive as his first from a rushing standpoint, but he made an even bigger impact in the pass game. 42 grabs for 427 yards on top of being a 1,000-yard rusher. Dare I say it, but Eddie Lacy had become elite. But it was short-lived. In 2015, pictures of Eddie Lacy being overweight started to really circulate around the internet, and as Eddie had a few injuries and saw his carries and production dip, this became a pretty big story. During the 2015 season, Eddie was listed at 234 pounds, which is only 3 pounds heavier than he was as a rookie. But I'm almost positive that this listed weight was BS, because 3 pounds over his rookie weight wouldn't be anything to be concerned about. But the Packers were very concerned. Here's a direct quote from Mike McCarthy. He's got a lot of work to do. His offseason last year was not good enough, and he never recovered from it. He cannot play at the weight he played at this year. So bam, all right? That's it. That's everything you need. A public challenge from his head coach to lose weight. But one thing a lot of coaches are unbelievably bad at is understanding the different personalities on their team. Now, as a head coach in the NFL, you got so much stuff to manage. I get it. But this is one of your star players, and just based on his personality, I'd say calling him out publicly is definitely the wrong move. Mike McCarthy later realized this and apologized to Eddie in private, but the damage had already been done. Trust me, this was all the ammo the internet needed, and the trolls was out, bro. They went in on Eddie Lacy every single chance they got. Despite this, Eddie used it as fuel and lost 22 pounds during the offseason. He was on that P90X and no longer wanted to even discuss his weight. But unfortunately, by October, according to reports, he had gained all the weight back. So the second the season started and his off-season program was done, Eddie Lacy ballooned back up. While averaging 5.1 yards per carry, he was gaining hella weight. Through those first 5 games, he was leading the league in broken tackles, and he was playing well. So it wasn't that he couldn't handle the weight from a performance standpoint. I think the Packers' biggest issues were injuries and fatigue. So what happened toward the end of that 5th game? Eddie injured his ankle and had to have season-ending surgery. Let me tell you something, when you struggle with your weight, the last thing in the world you need is to be forced into inactivity for a period of months. So Eddie, during this recovery process, he sat there, watched TV, and he ate. He asked a question. He said, "What else could I do?" And I'm like, I don't know, watch film, upper body workouts would work, have a nutritionist come up with a plan, so maybe you can't continue to lose weight, but you can at least maintain. Don't get it twisted. All that stuff would be unbelievably difficult when you're just sitting there and you can't do much. But when you ask the question, what else can I do, bro? I mean, there's stuff you could have done. It ain't easy, but it is some stuff. And that's like off the top of my head, bro. What Eddie did was this. He used that injury as an excuse to do exactly what he wanted to do anyway. and that was chill and eat whatever he wanted. Now that sounds harsh when you're talking about somebody who struggles with their weight. Some people gain weight much easier than other people. Some people can't gain weight, you know what I'm saying? But you gotta know which one of these body types you are, especially if you're a pro athlete and your body is literally your business. Gotta keep it straight, bro. You got to. After that injury, Eddie and the Packers parted ways, and it honestly wasn't too difficult for Eddie to find a suitor, even though he had ballooned up to nearly 270 pounds, 40 pounds heavier than he was as a rookie. It was during that time that the internet comments were running rampant, and Eddie unwisely indulged. He just couldn't tear himself away from the daily negative comments about his weight. He started to internalize all the negativity and developed a victim-like attitude towards it all. He started to feel like there was nothing he can do. People were just attacking him. Don't believe me? Here's a quote. People are always tweeting at me stuff like, I'm about to get this China food. Shout out to Eddie. This China food is why you weigh 260 pounds. And I just want to say, dog, that was 5 years ago. How is that something that happened then still relevant? But nobody cares. The negativity is always there, whether you're doing good or you're going through a funk. End quote. Yeah, it's true. The negativity is always there, bro. But so is the positivity. Now, as humans, we gravitate toward the negative comments. We really do. But I personally think they're both important. The positive stuff lets you know you're doing a good job. Keep doing what you're doing. Somebody out there is digging it. The negative stuff, assuming it's relatively constructive, which sometimes it's not, but assuming it's constructive, let you know that you're not perfect. And you ain't got a bunch of yes men out here. And if you don't stay straight, they're gonna call you on your bullshit. You just need a healthy dose. Now, like I was saying, the internet comments really started to get to Eddie, and they really started to bother him. And as a person who works on the internet, let me be the first to tell you, it's not as easy to ignore that stuff as you might think. And I'm just a YouTuber. I don't have the profile of an NFL player. But because Eddie Lacy is a football player and not an internet personality, a YouTuber, Instagram person, something like that, he ain't gotta be on the internet. So I started to ask myself, why is he putting himself through this every day? Here's what I think. Eddie Lacy became reliant on feedback back during his Alabama days. That's what motivated him early, whipped him into shape, and ultimately turned him into the best player that he could be. At the same time, I'm sure the Bama fans always had his back, always told him how great he was. And now that he's in the NFL, he's looking for that same feedback, but it's just not the same in the league. Now 90% of the feedback is negative, and the same way he internalized all the good feedback before, he's now internalizing all the negative feedback, and he's starting to think it's literally impossible for him to lose weight. Like I said earlier, Eddie did garner a decent amount of attention on the free agent market. It only took 5 days before the Seahawks swooped him up. They weren't scared of the weight, as they figured they had the perfect way to motivate Eddie. What motivates most men? Money. So they tied money to his weight loss, and they wrote it right into his 1-year deal. Basically, here's how it worked. There were weight requirements that required Eddie to make a certain weight by a specific date. And each time he did, he got a $55,000 bonus. That would go all the way up to $340,000 if he passed all the weigh-ins. And this was a good move, all except one little mistake. The Seahawks made this public. They made the stipulations public, and they made the results public. They did not realize they were dealing with a guy who read every headline ever about himself. This not only embarrassed Eddie, but it caused him some unnecessary anxiety. Even though he'd already passed a few weigh-ins, all he could think about was, what happens when I miss one? Because in his mind, even though he was doing good, his mental barrier said, eventually, you gonna fuck up. Eddie ultimately played poorly for the Seahawks behind an awful offensive line, and he wasn't picked up by a team this year. At 28 years old, with his last 1,000-yard season being in 2014, Eddie Lacy's NFL career is likely over. And while it's a proven fact that some people put on weight easier than others, and they also lose weight slower, it's not impossible for any person who's relatively healthy to shed the pounds. Eddie Lacy seems to have began to feel sorry for himself and make tons of excuses as to why he couldn't lose the weight. He constantly talked about his slow metabolism, how his teammates can eat whatever they want, and even how if he got down to 225 pounds, it wouldn't matter because people would still call him fat. I think that's where Eddie kind of defeated himself. He was so invested in what people thought about him that it built in mental barriers for him that he just couldn't break. He let the outside noise drown out his inner confidence, got down on himself, and then returned to the one thing that made him feel comfortable and secure as a kid: food. Today, Eddie Lacy is enjoying time with his family, arguing basketball in his group chat, and even quoting a few Wayne lyrics over on Twitter. He doesn't seem to be too hard pressed to return to football, and maybe that's for the best. Maybe that portion of Eddie's life has already run its course. When Eddie Lacy lost his childhood home to Hurricane Katrina, he wanted more than anything to get him and his family out of the trailer that they were forced to eventually move into. Once Eddie Lacy made it to the NFL and he was able to accomplish that goal that he'd had for so long, there was no real reason for him to keep going. The fact is, sometimes your passion fades, and when it does, it's okay to move on.
Yeah, you'll never know quitter, 'cause I'ma go get it.
Alright man, before we end the video, I gotta give a shout out to today's video sponsor, Squarespace. Now, I run into people all the time who ask me how I got started with an online business. And today's video sponsor makes it pretty simple once you've got your direction down. Whether you're working on your side hustle or your main gig, you can create a professional looking website using Squarespace's all-in-one platform. You can push t-shirts through your online store, make a side hub for your YouTube channel, or even go for something a little bit more complex and robust. Either way, Squarespace has got you covered. If you get stuck, no issue. They've got 24/7 award-winning customer support on deck and ready to help you get back on track. So if you're interested in creating a website for any reason, check out squarespace.com for a free trial. Then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/FlimloWraps and get 10% off your first purchase of a domain or website. Huge shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring the video. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I'm gonna holler at you next time. One.